Hello and welcome to this episode of Star Revelations with the fabulous Maria Jones and myself, Morgana Sophia. Maria, welcome.
Hello. We are just saying it's a very cold and rainy day, isn't it, today?
It
That we're
certainly
recording
is.
on. So we've got the cat. If you're watching the video, you can see Lilith is sat watching as well.
Brilliant. And it is a miserable day. However, we have chosen to record this on the day that the sun moves into Sagittarius, giving us a little fire after what has been quite a turbulent and torrid shadow season. Bit of a plot spoiler. The shadow's going to continue for a bit longer. So maybe we can just start off, kind of just looking at that transition of Scorpio to Sag, what that means, because we've still got a lot to go through during Sag season before the sun rebirths herself. And we've also got Lilith moving into Sag as well. So, Maria, how do you find this transition? I always find it quite a powerful day.
I do. And I think it's really interesting this year that we're going to have really going up until the sun goes into Capricorn at the solstice. We're going to have like a trail of planets, moving through Scorpio and into Sag. So at the moment, we've obviously got Sol and Mars in Sagittarius. We've just had the Scorpio new moon. But Mercury is now back in Scorpio. So she's gone back in. She's doing her dance with Lilith, which we talked about a lot in the previous podcast. We've got these upcoming conjunctions with Venus, who's also still in Scorpio. So there's this real dance that is going on in the collective and probably in our own psyche a little bit too, because Scorpio is that darkness. Scorpio will always drag us into the subconscious. It will always take us into those things that, we don't even want to admit to ourselves. So it's all good fun. Whereas Sagittarius is the meaning behind those experiences. So we come out of the underworld and into understanding, or we can always call Sagittarius the fire of gnosis. So it's very much this energy of, the realization of why I endured the dark night of the soul. So we have these two very different extremes of energy. And of course, Scorpio loves to brood and sulk and skulk around in the darkness. Sagittarius is like this kind of ultimate, everything's going to be okay. This is the best thing that's ever happened to me kind of energy. We were talking before we started recording about how this kind of really reflects the two extremes of the spiritual pathway in a lot of ways, hey? And how the darkness and the light have to be balanced and how they feed each other. So yeah, those are my perspectives on that
No,
transition.
I find that absolutely fascinating, and we are going to talk a lot about the light and the shadow, the polarity, people may say it as, of, how far can we go in the light and how far do we have to go before we cross into the dark, essentially. And the thing that I love about Sagittarius season is when Sun crosses the galactic center at 27 degrees of Sag. I hope I've got that right. No doubt the listener will tell us if we haven't got it right. And it's that time where we really go within, and actually I find is the place where we start to really create for the calendar year ahead, but also we're still in that kind of dark aspect of the year as well, because even though
Mm.
Sag is a beautiful fire sign, we are still in the death of the calendar year as well. So I find it a great time of kind of sitting in that cosmic void of, I've got all these ideas, and then you sit in that void and then you start to move forward as the sun goes into Capricorn, and the kind of hard work and dedication really come to mind. But Saggy season, yeah, I always find it incredibly exciting, but this year sort of tempered with that Mercury retrograde, which is actually just making us sort of lurk at the edge of the darkness just a little bit longer than maybe we would do before we kind of hit that full Saggy energy for me this year.
Absolutely. And I've always found it so interesting that Sagittarius season comes in the dark half of the year. And for me, like I say, Sagittarius is very much the fire of gnosis, the fire of understanding, the fire within that we touch when we do withdrawal. So we obviously at this time of year, we do turn inwards in the Northern Hemisphere because it's cold and miserable. Also, it's that necessary time of dreaming and communing and connecting with the self. So we bring the light in, don't we? We light the candles, we have the fairy lights, we can see the stars, sometimes, depending on where we live. But we have this, it's kind of like the Hermit card in tarot, where the light is within us. It's the light of inner illumination rather than the light of the outer world, which is, more reflected in Aries when the light starts to come back in the springtime. So there is that element of finding the light within the darkness. And these things are obviously intertwined, because to know one, you have to know the other. So I think Sagittarius has a tendency to, being a Jupiter ruled sign, it has a tendency towards what we often refer to as spiritual bypassing, or, Sagittarius is really that energy of everything will be okay, So Scorpio, of course, is the opposite to that. Scorpio is, I must excavate, I must go within and, do my shadow work. I must, master these demons. So it's like, how do we find that balance within us? And how far can we really go with each pathway without coming into that middle point?
The tightrope that we walk, to be neither light nor shadow. And as someone with a Sag rising and Sag moon, thank you for illuminating my shadow self. May I just throw into the bucket the kind of self-righteous, dogmatic, and incredibly judgmental aspects that we always get with Sag season as well. So it is a really interesting tightrope to walk, but let us talk about both the light and the shadow. So that's your astrology, folks. Okay, we're going to go into some more interesting stuff, throw a few truth bombs out there. But we were talking just before we started recording about light and shadow and dark matter and going beyond the light. So I am going to pass over to Maria, because she has this way with words of describing something that I cannot, and I shall just vigorously nod as she's explaining what the rabbit holes that she has been down, because it's absolutely fascinating. Maria, over to you, my love.
Thank you. Yeah, so as some of you know from previous podcasts, and some of you are journeying with us, we are currently teaching astrological magic, which is a journey through the planetary spheres. It's an ancient initiation system, which is rooted in Kabbalah and obviously, passed down through Hermetic and Golden Dawn traditions as well. So we are deeply immersed in this work of astrological magic and journeying through the Sephira on the tree of life, or the Kabbalistic tree. So for me, with all of my Scorpio energy and desire to go beneath the surface at all times, as I've been working with this and journeying along with the students, what I have actually been more drawn to is what is known as the clip-off, which is the shadow of the tree of life, sometimes called the tree of shells or the tree of death. So I've really been looking at this balance of shadow and light, and I've really been drawn to the understanding of black matter and the void and what is beyond the planets, because obviously once you've journeyed through the spheres, you've journeyed through the planets, you know, that is the manifest universe, that is the light multiverse. So what is beyond that? And when we go beyond that, we see the energy of the void, of the primordial chaos, which is where goddesses like Lilith actually emerge from. These are older, more primordial influences and deities. So when we're really looking at this from this perspective, really there's only so far we can go in the light universe, in the manifest universe. So we can go to our highest self, which is the highest expression of us in kind of all dimensions and all lifetimes, which are all, you know, really happening at once. I told you we were going to go a bit far out this time. So that's the highest version of ourselves that we can touch. But when we go into the void, there's more beyond that. There is a limit, you know, in the manifest universe, there is a limited amount that we can do. There's a limited amount that we can understand. But when we go beyond that, we get this place of infinite, slightly chaotic possibilities. So we have always been taught, you know, the darkness is bad. We need to eradicate it with the light. But actually, the light is manifested from the darkness. So that's the original point of creation, which, as you know, beings that want to create our own reality, is something we need to be able to touch. But we only get there through embracing Scorpio, through embracing the shadow aspects of the self. So this is just something that I've been contemplating personally, just some, you know, light evening entertainment for myself, some light study and meditation. But for me, you know, as a devotee of the star goddess in her many faces and forms, you know, for me, this is her energy. This is the energy of the Aquarian aeon, or, you know, very specifically Pluto in Aquarius, right? Because she is that primordial being, which, you know, like the stories we hear about Tiamat from Sumerian times, who actually births all of creation, who births the planetary spheres, which become the spheres of the tree of life, which we are all constantly journeying up and down through, you know. So the lightning flash comes down and the universe manifests, and then we spend our incarnation taking the serpent path back up, you know, the earthly journey back through the spheres to go back to this pinnacle of light. And then we have, you know, the void, which is beyond that. So for me, this is an interesting thing to contemplate with Sag to Scorpio, right? The expansion of consciousness, Sagittarius, the deeper meaning and purpose, but the Scorpio energy, which is not afraid of being in the void. So it's like, do we really want to, you kind of limit ourselves in the sphere of light, or do we want to expand beyond that? Hopefully that makes sense to everybody.
I makes sense to me. I'm not nodding around sagely, but that kind of leads rise to a much deeper and wider conversation as we start to look at, you know, the I'm going to say the love and light brigade, but the constant idea that we have to be flooding our physical, mental, spiritual, emotional bodies with light all the time in order to combat whatever, let's call it the darkness, and this kind of inherent fear that runs through both religious and more spiritual circles, that this dark is unpleasant, that we should never be ever venturing into it. And it really makes me start to wonder is how much are we limiting our spiritual experiences by only following the path of, I'm going to say good, the path of light, and making sure that we're always,
Mm.
high vibrational, that we are always, in our highest kind of self. Actually, are we limiting ourselves because we're preventing ourselves from having another experience, which ultimately could lead to deeper soul's growth for us to return back into those primordial cosmic waters to embody the cosmic mother on earth? That's where I'm kind of heading to at the moment, is what we are being taught in the mainstream actually limiting us from evolving and growing?
Well, I would suggest that that is most definitely the case.
Thank you.
Because the awakening of consciousness is what the people that, or the beings that control this reality in their various ways through religion or politics or banks or whatever, the awakening consciousness is what they most fear, hey? And when you are in that constant space of flooding yourself with light and only connecting with angelic forces or what you might perceive to be loving and compassionate energies, like Mary, what happens is you become very fearful of your own shadow
Mm.
and you become very suppressed and you are not whole and sovereign into yourself. Yeah. So we might call that in astrology, you're suppressing your inner Lilith, you know. So we are beings and creatures of duality. And when we focus only on one polarity, we lose a lot of energy. And it takes a lot of energy for us to suppress our natural animalistic urges, which are very shunned in modern spirituality and religion. It takes a lot of energy for us to kind of deny those aspects of ourselves that we might not want to meet. So actually what we've done collectively is gone, oh, those things are demons, which is
Yeah.
where the whole the whole kind of law around demonic energies and forces come from. But actually, in ancient magical texts, a demon or a daimon is only a disowned part of yourself that actually needs integration. So all of that stuff that we are projecting outward only serves as kind of a layer of self-protection for what we actually don't want to see within ourselves. So we are every demon and we are every angel, we're capable of all things.
Mm.
So yeah, for me, I think you're always going to be limited at a certain point in your magical working, your manifestation, and your spiritual growth if you don't embrace the shadow.
Mm. I really like that. And the phrase that came to mind is kind of Stepford spirituality. We're all very, at times, there's this kind of Stepford wife sort of spirituality. This is how we do it. We remain pure. When we do this, we do that. And it is suppression. And I'm really seeing people being unwell, physically, mentally, emotionally unwell because they are suppressing their, for want of a better phrase and saying again, inner Lilith self. It's this whole
Mm.
denial of who we truly are. Again, it kind of comes back into that slightly toxic femininity, toxic spiritual femininity at times, where we're told we just have to be good and we just have to follow certain puritanical practices. Let's go. It's very kind of shadow side of Virgo at times, that to remain spiritually pure is to suppress all of these urges. And if you do want to join us in astrological magic next March, you will get a daemon integration practice. So if this is starting to get your juices flowing, just calling you in, calling you all in there. But I think this kind of spirituality of kind of having to conform to a cookie cutter kind of template is seriously damaging as well. And because if we think about those who run the world, just getting a little bit deeper, they don't fill themselves with love and light. They're part of the dark and the shadow. So for us to
Mm.
understand the dark and the shadow, be it our own self, be it, you know, slightly different aspects of magic, we can actually actively battle, for want of a better phrase in saying, those who are suppressing us because we understand their motives, we understand what they are doing. You know, it's all right being love and light, but actually the other side have got magic too, to quote Harry Potter. So actually it's kind of, we need to really understand all of it in order to be able to move away from this kind of matrix, because I see cookie cutter spirituality is almost a matrix keeping us pinned in at the moment.
It absolutely is, and I, can see it becoming more and more popularized. There's so much stuff out there that the upcoming generations can access, and you might say, oh, they're a little bit more awake than we were at that age. I mean, luckily for me, I grew up in a household where these things are quite normal. So, but I think for many people, you tend to come to it a little bit later in life. So you look at these, with the crystals and the incense and the astrology and the oracle cards, but it is that very limited, shallow kind of understanding that is being presented. Yeah, so we have to be really careful that we're not awakening into another trap. Yeah, another type of religion, because actually true magic is knowing yourself and doing your true will. So you become the black hole or the star at the center of the galaxy. Whereas, what we actually see in a lot of this kind of new upcoming new age programming is people conforming in a slightly different way. Or what we actually see a lot of, now I'm thinking about it, I'm ranting, but what we actually
Yeah, come on.
see a lot of is, this kind of manifestation stuff, these younger women, journaling, vision boards, manifesting, but it's still in that materialistic sphere. I'm manifesting a new job, I'm manifesting a new apartment, or this and that and the other. So there is these kind of inklings of what you can do with magic, but it's being very much channeled into the current mainstream materialistic culture. Or there's this kind of other polarity, which I see a lot on Instagram and TikTok, which is like this dark feminine awakening. But, let's use it to manipulate men or draw men in, find your inner siren by understanding your Lilith sign. And, you can just imagine Lilith recoiling in horror at all of this.
It's funny you mention that,
yeah.
because someone very well known has just done a Hex Your Ex workshop. I mean,
Yeah.
do no harm.
So,
Yeah.
So I think the point I'm trying to make here, in a very long-winded Mercury retrograde kind of way, is that spirituality is now intertwined with consumerism for the younger generations. Whereas actually what it's about is awakening and knowing your true self, and knowing yourself as divine, is, becoming identified with the divine presence. It's not really, I mean, money is lovely. We love we love being
We like
able to
cash.
support ourselves. We love being able to do good things in the world because we're well resourced. No money shaming, especially not during Scorpio season. But what I'm saying here is the focus of this energy is directed in the wrong way, because actually outer manifestation is a bit like a parlor trick. the actual work is to become so centered in yourself that you're magnetic to the things that you are desiring. So there are 2 steps to that in my personal experience. First is to know yourself through astrology, to come very closely intimate with all of your light and shadow through your astrological charts, through understanding what you came here to be and do. And secondly, then from that knowledge, beginning to devote yourself to magical practices, and sharing that with the world in ways that are supported by your birth chart. So, for me, and that's the Aquarian energy too, that's the quickest route to awakening. But that requires a lot of hard work.
And it's hard work and dedication. It really is. We're not going to say, oh, click your fingers, read The Secret, and this is what's going to happen to you, which is interesting because The Secret is very much based on the mentalist aspect of the corpus hermeticum, the hermetic principles of everything that is, everything is created. Everything in the mind, the universe is mental, therefore everything is a mental creation, but actually it completely misses the rest of the hermetic principles that we need to follow in order to really truly manifest. If I see anybody else trying to manifest a Porsche, or quite like a Porsche actually, but it's this kind of very materialist manifesting, she says, looking at her vision board she created the other day. But it's true. It's very much very watered down, consumerist, marketable, kind of slightly sexy manifestation as well, isn't it? It's just started with The Secret and kind of just dripped into everyday life. Oh, if you do a bit of positive journaling, it's all going to happen for you. No, it's not.
And I think these tools are great. The vision boards, the journals, I've also guilty of buying a new journal every year, which I write in 3 times and then forget about. But no, these are really great tools because you do want to focus your energy. We do need to have support in the material realm for sure, but these things are stepping stones. And when we lock ourselves into these kind of positive affirmation types of spirituality, and I had this experience myself because my journey started when I was, young, I was in my teens, 20s, and I was very much in this kind of love and light spirituality. And it is a stepping stone, but you can create a lot of fear and anxiety for yourself because, if I do this the wrong way, if I, taking an action that isn't in alignment, if I'm having a negative thought, if I'm having a bad day, you're going to be really, really hard on yourself. Whereas actually, with a magical consciousness, what we do is we welcome all things. So we might say we pour everything into the cup of Babylon, but actually, we are drawing on both the dark and the light. We are fully integrated. And, that is the human condition. So we need to be incorporating both of these aspects in our manifestations and in our magic as well, if we actually, want to wield any kind of power.
Absolutely. And this is by no means the kind of, the love and light community is wrong, because both Maria and I have come from that background. I'm slightly later than you, but it has been an amazing stepping stone in order for us to grow a soul. So before I was studying magic, I began to really understand some of the things that I now use in magic through the kind of the new age practices, essentially, which was my very soft introduction to magic and realizing that there is a lot more to it. So all the books that we have read and all the videos that we've watched, all the workshops we've been to and taught in my case as well, are really, really important. What we're trying to show you is that there is something beyond that, which is even more, which is going to test you. It's going to stretch you. It's going to require discipline. But if you really want it, it's there for you. So we're kind of saying this, it is a stepping stone, but here is the doorway that you can step through in order to know thyself and the whole of thyself as well. So I think that's a just an important little disclaimer we put on there, because it is really important and it's taught me so much actually. And if it's all right with you to kind of segue a little bit into the kind of ceremonial magic and the new age, my
Mm.
first introduction to parts of ceremonial magic was actually when I was on a plane. So I didn't like flying for it never bothered me. And then I got into my late 20s and flying really bothered me. I didn't like it. I didn't realize I was going through my Saturn return, big spiritual awakening. And I remember reading a book. Now, we're not going to mention any names here, okay? But the book had an invocation to Archangel Michael for safe travel, where you said, Michael, before me, behind me, to my right, to my left, above me, and below me. So you're basically boxed into this kind of sandwich of Archangel Michael for safe travel. It didn't click for a long time until I started reading magic books. And when you're doing your LBRP, you're calling in the four angels above and below as well. And actually, this particular writer had taken a version of the LBRP, Better Managing Ritual of the Pentagram, watered it down, made it angelic, and was using it. That was literally one of my first introductions to magic, because now I see that someone somewhere wanted me to read this book to understand what could be done. But there is a lot of, I can go through a whole list of watered down versions, but I just wanted to share that one first, that they're really in the psyche. The work that the Golden Dawn did and the work that the book behind me, Israel Regaldi's work on the Golden Dawn has really permeated through into wider practices, albeit quite watered down.
Absolutely. And he was a Scorpio as well, wasn't he, of course? So yeah, we've talked before about how a lot of these magical people have these quite strong scorpionic elements. But Dion Fortune is coming into my mind actually, who had a lot of Sagittarius energy too. So, Sagittarius is that holder of the fire of knowledge. It is that teacher energy. But I think, as we were chatting about before we started recording, all of these so-called new age practices, actually most of them originate from Hermetic teachings or something even older, teachings which they would most likely refer to as impure or demonic. So yeah, it's very interesting. I'm sure a lot of them would be quite horrified to know that a lot of the things that they are channeling and bringing through, were maybe actually originally developed by somebody like naughty Mr. Crowley, or because these teachings from the Golden Dawn, particularly the mystery schools they have in the UK, have really filtered down through modern Wicca, modern spirituality in so many ways. So we really need to examine the roots of these practices as well.
It feels like an open invitation for me to go all history geeky on you.
Oh, I know you've got a list. I know you have.
A little bit of research that I did. So if you, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, take yourself back to 1566, the great philosopher Paracelsus, I think that's how we say, or Paracelsus, has written a book which is entitled A Book on Nymphs, Sylphs, Pygmies, and Salamanders and Other Spirits. In that book, this is the first time that we really start to see the elements being given elementals. So, for example, the gnomes relating to earth, the unidines, I think it's like that, to water, the sylphs to air, the salamanders to fire. Anybody else recognizing some of these things from some of the New Age teachings? We also have it in Agrippa's De Occulta Philosophia, which was written a little bit earlier in the 1530s, who again has four classes of spirits. If you go to a lot of more nature-based New Age stuff, we are working with the gnomes, the Unadines, the sylphs, the salamanders, the Warburtons from the trees, any other elementals, fairies, for example, nymphs. People are working with these energies. These go a lot further back than a Fairies 101 book, shall we say. Not to be mentioned by any author, sorry. And then, we've
Given
got the
away.
Rosicrucians as well, who were esoteric Christians, full of Hermeticism. So then we look at Hermetics. We go back to the Hermetic principles, Hermes, I can't ever say this, Trismegistus, which is a blend of Hermes and Thoth, written about 100 to 300 BC in the Corpus Hermetica, which sets down the Hermetic principles. So some of the Hermetic principles you may recognize from The Secret or other books. So mentalism, all is mind, the universe is mental and everything is mental creation. And the law of correspondence, as above, so below, as within, so without, from the Emerald tablets. There's also laws of polarity, vibration, cause and effect, gender. Everything is already in these hermetic principles as well. So that's going back into the kind of Renaissance magic. And then you come in a little further and you realize that the key angels mentioned in these New Earth texts, Raphael, Gabriel, Michael, Uriel. Oh, I'm sorry. Do they appear in the traditional LBRP as the four angels, the four directions? You'll see people calling in the four directions. Every magician starts in the east and does their magic. Most ceremonies start in the east, calling in the guardians, the angels, the elementals. So this is also become, watered down. We've got other authors who shall not be named, who actually actively reference Blavatsky, Alice Bailey, Elizabeth Clare Prophet, Guy Ballard, um, the women who brought through can't say my word today, theosophy, the ascended masters, Serapis Bey, Almoira, Saint Germain, Camuthi, the Violet Flame. These are all coming through based on either Hermetic Golden Dawn principles or coming through a kind between the 1870s to the 1930s, 1940s. It's a little break. And then suddenly around the 1970s, we have this birth of kind of New Age spirituality, which we can get back to the astrology now because Maria's an expert on this. Get back to the Great Convocation of 1989, where we really welcomed in the kind of the New Age spirituality per se. This was the first gathering of people bringing in and anchoring in the new earth frequency. So you can see how these are all from the Renaissance and from before that. Let's not even go into kind of Egyptian magic and the use of the Ankh in New Earth and New Age practices as well. There's so much wealth of practices that are being taken down and watered down. And the final thing that I will finish with is things like the middle pillar, pulling white light through your chakras. If that isn't standing on Malkuth and pulling up the planetary spheres, I don't know what is. So that's a little bit of kind of history geekiness as to where we've got to, and the things that are still used. Alice Bailey's Great Invocation and the other one, which I can never remember the name of, which is I am soul, I am light, I am love, I am will, I am fixed design. You still hear people using that. that was brought through, a long time ago, and that has some really interesting roots. Alice Bailey, Madame Blavatsky, who were they really bringing through? Open question. And there endeth part one of the history lesson.
Oh, we have part two. That's exciting. No, thank you for all of that. That's some really amazing research. And it is so interesting, isn't it, to just kind of reflect on how this has come down, really from things like Agrippa and, the Corpus Hermeticum, the ancient Egyptian texts, which a lot of these practices originated from and then were adapted, by Crowley and Dion and Florence, during their time, and then we kind of bring them forward and adapt them again for this Aquarian aeon. But what's interesting to me is, a lot of people who are, maybe learning these practices in a more new age way actually have no real concept of what they are doing. And what we're seeing is a very kind of watered down energy. I'm just thinking of things like sylphs and salamanders. These are ancient primordial beings. These are the elements, the building blocks of creation. So we need to really be aware of what we're doing. And also, I think I was having this discussion actually with some of the students. I can't remember which spiral meeting it was. There's been so many through Samhain. But those of you who there would have heard me talking about dragons. So in the new age, it's kind of like, oh, you can call on this dragon and this and that, and, dragon of this, dragon of that. And if anybody has actually encountered a dragon in their visions or dreams, you will know that dragons are not, meek, obedient energies. These are primordial forces of creation that you're messing with. They don't come because you pick an oracle card. So this is the kind of thing we want to really be aware of, and ask ourselves, do we really want to dedicate ourselves to the work of going further than this? Do we want to seek what is actually beyond? And if we do, there are going to be some uncomfortable places that we will have to go to. And something else which I think is in the Corpus Hermeticum is to apprehend God or divinity, you have to become like divinity.
So, I like that idea.
Yeah. So again, it's that as above, so below. And these are very deep spiritual truths, which are based on, the very mercurial kind of Thoth Hermes understanding of reality, right? So they're very deep spiritual truths. And when we're seeing this kind of secret Abraham Hicks type application of them for, manifesting a new job or whatever it is, wonderful. But actually, we should be seeking something beyond that with these teachings, because ultimately, in the level of Malkuth, in the realm of the sphere of the earth, these things are not going to satisfy you for long. There's going to be something else. What I'm trying to say is we're using these techniques to try and fill our void still, rather than.
And may I suggest you look at your Venus placement if you have a void?
Yes, absolutely. Look at what Venus is up to in your chart. And Jupiter, is that energy of fortune and manifestation, but Saturn will show you your limitations. So understanding yourself can help you to, through astrology, can actually direct you to knowing what it is you really do need to manifest.
Absolutely.
Yeah. What is actually going to bring some sense of fulfillment in this fleeting
fleeting existence that we have.
Yeah,
I just want to
yeah.
bring in part two, if that's okay, just to bring a little bit of balance, because we seem to have bashed one kind of new age spirituality. So I'm going to have another little bash. Can we have a bit of a Wicca bash now? Just a bit of balance, because Wicca is ever growing in popularity. It's not particularly Wicca based, but just a couple of other things to be really mindful of in some of the practices that we do as well, particularly if you're in that witchcraft space. You know, Maria and I do practice all sorts of things, which may or may not involve candles and all sorts of things. However, it's just being really aware that the background to some of these practices again come back to the Golden Dawn. So I'm going to mention Naughty Gerald Gardner, who was the creator of Wicca, you know, initiated by Dorothy Clutterbuck in the New Forest somewhere.
Fabulous
Actually,
name.
I know, I mean, Clutterbuck, right? I mean, if she ever existed. But of course, if you really dig into this, and this is a whole podcast on itself, and I'm hoping we might get a guest to talk about this, fingers crossed. If you really dig into it, you actually realise that he was initiated into the OTO by Uncle Alistair himself. And
Mhm.
actually, a lot of the Wicca traditions are watered down versions and adapted versions of the Golden Dawn practices. And then others are based on kind of Rupert Graves and the White Goddess, because Gardner and Graves knew each other. You know, he was also linked to Ross Nichol, who created the bards, oviates, and druids. So we're not going to bash druids today. But, you know, they all knew each other. You know, the calendar of the Wheel of the Year, which I'm going to actually reference our brilliant friend Callie, who said was basically drawn up on a fag packet by two blokes who, you know, were nudists and kind of created the Wheel of the Year, because you and I know we don't follow that. We follow the astrological wheel of the year. We align ourselves to the actual dates of everything that is going on. So there's a lot more that people don't realize by thinking, oh, I'm really alternative because I'm X, Y, and Z. Again, you know, it all links back to the Golden Dawn. We can even link Doreen Valiente back to Alpha Omega, which was a split off of the map order of the Golden Dawn, and some of her practices come from there. You know, she did write the brilliant Charge of the Goddess, so I have to say. You know, you've got Madeleine Montalban, knew Crowley. You know, it
Mm.
all she knew Crowley as well, so it's all linking back to the Golden Dawn. You know, you've also got Alex and Maxine Sanders, who kind of took down the Alexandrian Wiccan. Bit too much sex magic-y for me. But you know, it's all linking back to a lot of these kind of Golden Dawn practices. So just being aware that everything that you're practicing, you really need to understand the root and foundation of what you were doing. And then just I'm going to throw in here, because I am a yoga teacher. I am proud to be a yoga teacher. And on astrological magic, you do get bonus yoga lessons. But again, a lot of magicians have practiced yoga. If you go in a lot of the New Earth, New Age books, they all practice yoga. They all practice pranayama, breath control, to enhance your aura, to enhance your energy. So just be aware again, you know, these ancient traditions are filtering in. You know, for example, some of the breath work, the pranayama that we teach in astrological magic is incredibly powerful to cultivate your energy. So when you're doing a breathwork practice, go back into the Vedic texts. Why are you doing it? That's a whole other topic and thing, but just be aware a lot of magicians practice yoga because it's the first way you learn to control your energy. And there endeth lesson 2.
Yes. So what I'm really hearing here, from all of this amazing research, which should probably become an essay or something. Um,
Probably. That book we're going to write.
yeah, the 10th book on the list, is that most of the kind of modern spirituality practices, and Wicca really is, you know, also, you know, having a lot of roots in druidry and paganism as well, which is, again, you know, its own branch of magic, which we, you know,
Yeah.
don't really fully understand in our modern world. But what I'm really hearing is, a lot of these practices that are New Age, that are Wicca, that many of us come to in our kind of first baby steps into the realm of consciousness, have actually originated from the Golden Dawn. And the Golden Dawn is obviously very much rooted in ancient Egyptian and Hermetic texts. So then I asked myself, from the black void of matter, where did they come from before that?
That's a whole podcast in itself.
Is this the kind of, what Plato would have referred to as old Atlantean teachings? Were these teachings brought to us by Nephilim or otherworldly beings? Because we know that the Nephilim, came and taught the human women the arts of makeup and witchcraft and astrology and all the naughty things. So, where do these things originate from? We know where they're found. We kind of roughly have some dates and understandings of where they've come from and who might have written them, but where did that information come from? So what we're doing is we're following these different lineages that are whichever one we resonate with most. People who love nature, they're into druidry. People love astrology, people love magic, and there are all these different stepping stones that lead us to where we're supposed to be, but we have to be willing to evolve. And I think that's where we can get stuck in the level of light, because you have to cross the abyss to go into a deeper level of understanding, which is that kind of undefined realm on the tree of life, if we bring it back to that, the there or not there sphere of dust. So and we know a lot of Crowley's workings, some of his really powerful teachings, things like the vision and the voice were birthed into being when he was doing the magical working to cross that void. So we all have different parts of ourselves that we need to integrate and face, and that depends where we are on our journey at any given time. But what I would encourage everybody is to seek beyond where you're at. That's Scorpio, that uncomfortable edge of growth. So if you want more understanding, you've got to do something different.
I love that. And I think that's a brilliant place to end. If the listener can ask themselves that question. Maria, it's been a pleasure as always.
It's been very fun.
Always is. Yes, we are very feral.
Podcast. A very, very information-packed Mercury retrograde podcast.
Why not? So, as Maria and I skip off into the abyss for a couple of weeks, we will be back with a new episode very, very soon. Sending you a lot of love and a little bit of light as you come and find us in the abyss. Take care.